We think about being a king or a monarch, an emperor, or whatever, and we think of this easy life. But the fact is that you do not actually have control of your life when you're a monarch. So Blessed Karl, he was the last Austrian-Hungarian emperor. He was the last Habsburg emperor, and he was the emperor during World War I. And he actually became the emperor in the middle of World War I. He did not start it or anything like that. In fact, it was his uncle who was the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire throne, who was killed, that started World War I. He's a great example for today. I think everybody today with what's going on, of course, in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, thoughts of war, thoughts of peace are forefront in our minds. And really, Blessed Karl, I think, is the model for us to look to, because he was somewhat radical for his day. I mean, because he really strove for peace. I mean, World War I was a perfect example of where escalation was the way to go. A small conflict between two nations, localized, turns into the war to end all wars.
The vast majority of people who saw World War I starting to build thought it was going to be a picnic. They actually brought picnic baskets to watch the battle unfold in the valley beneath them, not really realizing the absolute carnage that was about to be unleashed. But Blessed Karl had the foresight to recognize what was coming. And my understanding is that he and Pope Benedict XV were both working together to try and broker peace, and no one was listening.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. I mean, one thing to note is Blessed Karl was also the only one of the world leaders at this time who had actually been a soldier in war. And so he knew what it was like. He wasn't somebody who just was like, just let's put people on a board and then we'll move and all of a sudden we'll take over and everything will be fine. He understood what war was really like in the trenches. And you're absolutely right. He worked with Pope Benedict XV. And he basically, being a member of a royal family, obviously he was connected to the royal families in other nations. And so one of the things he did was he worked behind the scenes with the royal families in both England and in France. Well, in France it was different, a little bit different, but he worked behind the scenes with people in France and England to try to broker a peace. And to be honest, he went behind the back of his allies in Germany only because Germany would not listen to him. They were so war hungry. They so much were just like, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win, that they would not listen to any negotiations. So he tried to get Germany on board with this. Finally, he was like, they're just not listening. They think we're going to win. He actually knew they were probably not going to win also.
Right.
But more than anything, he just wanted the war to end. And so he worked behind the scenes. But the problem is that France and England already had a backdoor agreement with Italy, and they betrayed him because he didn't know about this, and they were going to give Italy part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire once they won. And so the whole thing was, I like to say, Blessed Karl was the only adult in the room. I mean, it just was amazing how much people just wanted war, and they wanted to, every side thought, we're going to win, we're going to wipe out the enemy. And of course, that's not the way war works. What happens is the people get wiped out, not the leaders. That was the real tragedy of Germany, is the German Kaiser, he very much wanted to be looked upon as this war leader. And so he just listened to whatever the generals said. And the generals kept telling him, oh, yeah, we have this wrapped up. There's no way we can lose this. And of course, Blessed Karl, like I said, who had been in war, when he came to the throne in Austria, he realized, oh, okay, this is not the situation that we're being told. He understood what really was going on. And also to mention about how people lived then, he very much lived a very ascetical life. Here he is, the emperor. I mean, you know, people picture an emperor as always living in luxury and all that stuff. No, he lived on rations. He forced his family to do that as well. He's like, we're not going to live differently than the men on the front lines. And so they lived very simply. In fact, his wife and his son, they talked about this later, that this is how they grew up. I mean, how his son grew up was living like this, because he really understood that he wanted to identify with the frontline troops, and he would go to the front lines too. I mean, that's the thing is, and that's why I really feel like today he's a good model, because we have the unfortunate ability to wage war from a computer terminal. And so we just think of like, okay, we're back here, we can just press some buttons, drop some bombs and things like that. personally, I use Blessed Karl has been my intercessor. I've been praying for when praying for peace, both in Ukraine, in the Holy Land, and other places, because I feel like he is he's been given to us today. The church, beatified him. I think it was about 20 some years ago. I really feel like he's been given to us as the model for peace. And he did a lot of other great things too. That's not the only reason he was beatified, but that really is the example, I think, for us in the midst of all these wars and warmongering you hear in America. We have somebody we should look to as Catholics to ask for his intercession for peace.
Absolutely. And it seems to me that today, we've got the conflict growing in the far Eastern Europe, between Russia and Ukraine. You've got the conflict brewing in the Middle East, and there are all kinds of conflicts starting to really erupt in Asia. Nobody's really talking about that part of it right now, but with all of these conflicts that are brewing and the heated discussions and the war drums that are beating, while we had Blessed Karl as the adult in the room, as you say, there doesn't appear to be an adult in the room now. And in fact, we don't even have a Benedict XV who is out there able to sit down at the table with these men and to call for a universal prayer for peace, and to really promote the idea that this is not something that is going to end well for us. And there are spiritual ramifications where a great vast majority of the people in this conflict are not going to come out on the good end. So how do we, I mean, obviously we should be asking for the intercession of Blessed Karl, and also I think the intercession of Pope Benedict XV, though he's not beatified, but there's a good reason to believe that he may be. So I think that we do have to have these intercessory prayers, but we also need to find some leader who is willing to sit down and say, enough.
The result of the crisis in the church is that we don't have the moral authority, the church doesn't, that it used to. Because Pope Francis has actually been pretty good about this as far as what he says about peace. Mm-hmm. He really is trying to drive home the importance of peace. The problem is, for a lot of reasons, which we've all talked about for a long time, the Catholic Church just simply does not have the moral authority that it used to. And so it doesn't have the ability to basically say, okay, let's all sit down at the peace table, because nobody's listening anymore very much to the Catholic Church. Now, what we do see is, though, when a man steps up and does have that personal moral authority, things can happen. So, for example, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Cardinal Pisabola, he has been a great example. He's called for fasting and prayer. He has also he's living right there in the situation, and he understands, I'm not going to take one side and just warmonger against the other side. He understands there's innocence on both sides, and he's working for peace. And he's the one who said, I will take me in exchange for the hostages, to Hamas, the hostages they took. He said, take me instead. And he was serious, and he was willing to be taken as a hostage in exchange for them. That is the moral authority that people look to. And so my prayer is that perhaps he becomes more and more prominent in this, and people will listen to him, and he might be the one, a man who can be that, the adult in the room, so to speak, the person that people listen to. At least that's my hope and my prayer.
Let's talk a little bit about his personal sanctity. I mean, he's a blessed for a reason, and it's not just because he was trying to broker peace, but because he was extremely devout and very devoted to Our Lady too, and this practice of asceticism. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about Blessed Karl is that his feast day is actually October 21st, which is not the day of his death, but instead is the day of his marriage. And when John Paul II picked that date, I think there was a very good reason for that, because he was a very devoted husband and father. His family was so important to him, and he had I think it was 8 kids, and he died young in life, and so he was only married for I think 12 years before he died. And so he very much, though, I remember the great quote is, on the night of before his marriage, he said to his wife, now let's work to get to heaven together. Like, he understood that's what marriage was about, was getting to heaven together, helping each other get to heaven. And so he had this personal sanctity, like you said. Remember the context. he is the heir to the throne to be the emperor of this great empire. Now, of course, he ends up getting removed from office, but he, of course, didn't know this at the time. But he has the ability to live in all this luxury, all this he doesn't have to be ascetical. He doesn't have to. Most emperors, let's be honest, they had mistresses, and he did not. And in fact, his father did not live a good Catholic life. His mother was very devout, and so he even had a bad example from his father, who had many mistresses. And so here we have a situation where he chose. I mean, he could have lived like most other emperors and kings have lived in the past. He could have lived a very lavish lifestyle. He could have had mistresses, all this stuff, but he chose sanctity instead. And I really think that's a great example to all of us, because the temptations he had to have faced to live a hedonistic lifestyle were immense, much greater than most of us have to deal with, and yet he chose sanctity. And his wife, who's actually a servant of God now, she's also on the track. And I think the belief is once she gets beatified, her feast day will be shared with his, obviously, on October 21st. But it really is this great example. Their kids all became all devout Catholics. I mean, sadly, he died just a few years after the war of sickness, and so he did not get to see his kids grow up, but his example was such a great example to them. And I really feel like this is something that we all can think of in our own marriages, those of us who are married, of looking to him and blessed and servant of God Zita as these examples of holiness. So like I said, he's been beatified for a lot of reasons, but he had that personal sanctity of choosing to live in the midst of great temptation. I think most of us, if we're honest, if we had the opportunities he did for living a hedonistic lifestyle, most people would choose it. And yet he didn't. He chose sanctity instead.
So give us some examples of what this choice looked like. What did it look like for him to choose the ascetic life? I mean, obviously what we're talking about is not indulging in lavish meals and not indulging in great parties and elevating himself, obviously, which would have been a temptation, because he could just turn around and say, hey, I'm the emperor, you got to adore me. I'm the guy in charge. But he didn't. But what were some of these personal ascetic practices? What did it look like in practice for the rest of us as a good primary example?
Yeah, I think that one of the main things he did was, it was typical for the royal family, for emperors. They had many servants, and so they would serve them lavish meals at every meal. And what he would say, no, I'm having a simple meal. He would have soup, bread, something like that. And especially during the war, because he knew that, of course, all these things cost money. And one of the biggest things that countries have to worry about in time of war is spending money, because they need the money for the troops and all of that. And so what he did was he said, no, this is how we're going to live. This is how we're going to eat. Also, he made sure that, for example, he would stay very simply at the houses where, the different places where palaces and things like that. He would get to the bare bones, not a lot of pomp and circumstance. In fact, he had to be convinced. He became the emperor. His uncle, great uncle, died, the emperor then, in November during the war, 1918, during the war, 1917, sorry, and then he became emperor. And one of the things was that you then became the king of Hungary, and there was a big ceremony for that. He did not want to do that because of the war effort. He didn't want to have this big spectacle. However, finally he was convinced, because they said, we really need this as kind of, the people want this. They want to see you at the coronation as the king of Hungary. They want to see all of the spectacle, that it is important for the people to rally around you, to rally around the country. So he said, okay, we will do that. But then literally, once the coronation was over and he did all the things that he was supposed to do with coronation, there was these big parties going to be afterwards. He said, no, I'm going back to Vienna because I need to continue to lead the war effort and work for peace. So he did not have his family go to all these lavish parties afterwards, because he's like, nope, that's not what this is about. So those are type of things where he personally chose, okay, I have to put peace first. I have to put the troops first. I have to put ending the war effort and really identifying with the people, because the people, there was restrictions on what people could do and eat and things like that for obvious reasons, because in the middle of war, you need to get the food to the troops. So everybody else was restricting what they did. He's like, I can't ask them to do that, and then I don't do that, which it sounds like we all should be like that, but most world leaders weren't living like that. We think about being a king or a monarch, an emperor, or whatever, and we think of it as this easy life. But the fact is that you do not actually have control of your life when you're a monarch. It's basically the court around you controls so much that you can't do anything about. And like you said, the court is very much interested in helping itself, making it their own lives very easy. And so, yes, he had a lot of resentment among some of the closest people around him, the court, because of his holy life. The people loved him, but not those, because, like you said, what happens is they don't get the benefits. They don't get the benefits of if he lives this more courtly, this more kingly life, then they don't get benefits. But of course, he knew, I'm in the middle of a war. I can't be doing this. I mean, that's the thing, is the focus is always, let's get the troops home, let's have a peace, and then we can live a more peaceful lifestyle.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.